Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, weekly podcast in which, actually, it's something a little different this week. We were off this week, and so I was reminded that we had some interviews in the feed from Discord folks. So if that's something that interests you, keep listening. Otherwise, pass on, and we'll be back, I believe, next week. This is an interview featuring Biostats, Calamity Nolan interviewing Ben from Iowa, those are their Discord names, but they are Ryan, Nolan, and Ben. I will also note that this discusses issues around mental health, though nothing too heavy. But enjoy, and we'll see you next week. I'll be back on the other side for an outro.
Welcome to Discord Game Club's Just Rhetoric, a podcast where Nolan and myself interview DGC Discord members. Today we're excited to bring you this debut episode, featuring a man who also has his own podcast, Ben from Dragoon Effect. I'm your host Ryan, or Biostats in the Discord, and I will let them introduce themselves right now.
I'm Nolan, Calamity Nolan, on the Discord, and I'm also interviewing.
I'm Ben from Dragoon Effect, but also Ben from Iowa, so if you remember emails, the many emails that I've written for Dev Game Club, that is generally how I'm known over there. I started a podcast called Dragoon Effect. That's an audio-only Let's Play podcast focused on trying to destigmatize mental health, and the Dev Game Club guys were kind of part of the inspiration behind it.
I have to get one question out of the way first. I had never heard it called Dragoon before. I had always heard Dragoon.
Oh, really?
I say it Dragoon, but, I'm also from Minnesota, so it might be a Midwest thing.
Oh, yes. Yeah, fellow Midwestern. No, I've never heard it Dragoon. I've always heard it Dragoon, like dragon, because my introduction to Dragoons was The Legend of Dragoon, and then shortly thereafter, one of the Final Fantasies, where that was a job class. But I know it goes farther back. On one of my year-end awards shows, one of the awards presenters did a little spiel about the origin of the word dragoon, and it's something about cavalry, and I wish I could remember it better because it was actually quite interesting.
At the risk of being wrong, I feel like it's a British military term.
That sounds right, yeah.
Thanks, Ben, for joining us, and I'd love for you to just sort of tell us a little bit about, in your own words, what you do. What is your audio-only Let's Play podcast?
Sure. So for those that don't know, an audio-only Let's Play podcast is a lot like Let's Plays that you would see on Twitch or YouTube or whatever, except, surprise, surprise, there's only audio. So it's a podcast. And the idea behind it was originally Alan Wake Remastered was coming out. And that is a game that I played when it launched back in 2010. And it wasn't like a game where I thought, oh my gosh, this is one of my favorite games of all time. But over the 11 years between release and the remaster, it just would pop up in my head over and over, just the concepts and the ideas behind it. And I thought, okay, I want to do Alan Wake as an audio-only Let's Play podcast. And when I was originally doing it, I thought this might be the only season that I do because who knows, I might hate it. So I just used my phone, so it was even more low-tech than what I currently do. And the audio is okay. I have since purchased a microphone, so it sounds much better. But then I thought, okay, there's X number of AOLPs out there. What am I going to do differently? And I thought, well, I'm at the point in my life where I'm dealing with my own mental health issues, as well as just seeing that there's lack of funding for it, and there's still this huge stigma around it. And as a game, Alan Wake kind of sets itself up to discuss and have conversations about mental health. So I thought, okay, that's a great way to start it. And so then it became like, okay, I'll kind of talk about myself, and I will never top the first 15 minutes of the first episode of my show because it is as raw and authentic as I think I have ever been in anything ever. And so I wish the audio was better because the quality is not as good as it could be. But it's just kind of gone from there, just talking about what I'm going through. I've had a few people write in that said I could share kind of what they've gone through, and just trying to say, hey, we all deal with things. Sometimes they're so overwhelming we don't want to get out of bed, and find somebody to go talk to. You don't have to see like a psychiatrist. There are counselors out there. There are different levels. Sometimes you just need somebody to talk to and give you some advice and point you in the right direction. And even sharing things that I've learned through that, I think, can be helpful.
It's great. So this is this full circle for you, right? Because your 12th season, which is currently releasing, is about Alan Wake 2.
Yes, yep, it is. And I'm doing this one differently than every other season, because I did a poll about it of should I try to blitzkrieg it as fast as possible, or should I release it week to week? And people are like, oh, you know what? Go to try to be in the zeitgeist for once. I was like, okay, sure, why not? I'll just put it out as fast as I can record and edit it, basically. At the same time, I am still putting out weekly releases of Season 11, which is confusing when I say it out loud. That's Metal Gear Solid 2, which is more than normal cadence. So since I've started, I've put out an episode every Tuesday for over 2 years. And then there's been some additional bonus episodes around that as well. And Alan Wake 2 is almost like a bonus season, but I decided to call it Season 12 to make it not seem as confusing.
So one of the interesting things is your tagline for your podcast. It might be terrible, but that's okay.
Yes.
I feel like that's good life advice to start with.
Yeah. It
How'd you land on that?
That just fell out of my brain. So I decided, I don't know, maybe a couple of weeks before Alan Wake Remastered came out that I was going to do this. And so it came out October 5th, and I took a day or two off work and just binged through it. And I released my first episode 2 weeks later on October 19th of 2021. So in the roughly month between when I was going to do it and that came out, I started working on just the logo, which is clip art basically that I found that I thought looked cool. And then it just, something in my brain just triggered like, it may be terrible. And I was like, you know what? It might be, because I'm recording off my phone. I'm not doing anything special. I'm not doing like dedicated channels between the game and my voice. It's all one channel. And that's totally fine. I'll just set that in the expectation in my my podcast art up front to just be, it may be terrible. And then when I started recording, it just fell out of, it may be terrible, but that's okay, because that's life. You know, if we only did things we knew we were good at, we'd never grow in any way. We'd never be challenged. We'd just be stagnant people. And then the other, what I consider my podcast's phrase is, I hope you have a good day this week. And that just came out, I don't know, a few seasons in. I just said it as I was recording an outro. And I went back and I edited, you know, I'd like to edit out all my coughs because I cough and yawn and things happen, or dead silence. And I was like, what does that even mean? And I think I even talked about that on the next episode. Like, I don't know what this means. But you know what? If you have one good day this week, that could be enough to propel you to next week, which could be more good days.
I think that's great advice. And maybe that can lead us into, if you want to tell us a little bit about your approach to planning and recording and releasing this whole podcast.
Sure. Boy, I've never thought about what my approach actually is. In general, I try to stay, I don't know, maybe 4+ weeks ahead of the release schedule to make sure I can keep hitting it, at least with recorded episodes. Sometimes I'm editing like the day before just to get it out. But in general, I try to have it recorded so that I know I can at least put something out. My game selections have been a combination of things that I wanted to replay, things that people suggested, or things that I wanted to try for the first time. So, like, season 1 was Alan Wake, and that worked really well. Season 2 was Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which I'd played once and kind of bounced off on, and then decided I was going to try it again because I just heard all these good things about it. And I had no idea how much it also aligned with mental health, because the main character has all these voices in her head. Some are spiritual or magical, trying to pull her in different ways, and they're just kind of driving her crazy over time. Which, if you ever play that game, it says it's recommended to play with headphones, and I believe it, because there's just these whispers that keep popping up in your ear, and it's really involved, but it can also be too much for people. I've had some people say, hey, I couldn't play this even without headphones, but I could listen to you play it because it added another level of separation between the voices and myself. And especially because you could come in and just be like, oh, that was creepy, or that was cool, or whatever. And then my intros and outros, they kind of just became things that I stumbled across, like quotes that I've seen, or they were things that were going on in my life that's like, hey, I have been dealing with just depression this week. I've had no motivation to do anything. It's that time of year. It's seasonal affective disorder, where I'm bundling up for winter, basically. And then over time, I realized I was running out of things. And so my outros have turned into, hey, here's a game that I finished and my thoughts on it. But going forward, what I'm going to try next year is copying another Let's Player who does rolled credits episodes. And so he just puts out like 3 to 4 minutes whenever he finishes a game, because then they stand on their own. Because I have some friends and some other podcasters that are like, man, I really want to listen to that season, but I also want to play that game, so I don't want to have it spoiled for me. And then they're like, wait, you've been talking about games you've been playing other than the recorded one? Oh, I don't want to actually mark it as played, though, that I've listened to it. It's like, you know what? That makes a really good idea. So I'll just move to doing those kinds of things more as bonus episodes, because I think that's been a really good idea the way he's done it.
What are some of the other influences you've drawn from? So you mentioned at least DGC, but it sounds like there are a number of Let's Plays and other things you're drawing from.
This goes back a long way. So in 2007, I bought a video iPod, and with that, I stumbled across the category podcasts, and I had no idea what those were. So I just like downloaded some out of curiosity. And there were some that were like, oh, these are like just people talking, and a lot of them that I tried I didn't care about. There's one that I came across called Oh Yeah Dude, that was just these two guys just talking about news and things that were going on in their life. And I listened for like 5 years to them, and they're still putting out new content, but I haven't listened in a long time. So that kind of started the idea of like, it's not this big production or anything. And then I started listening to other podcasts like Kotaku Split Screen and Giant Bomb, others I can't think of off the top of my head on the timeline. But then on Split Screen, Jason Schreier was like, oh, hey, I started listening to this podcast that's an audio-only Let's Play called No One Can Know About This, a podcast where they play every Final Fantasy. And I was like, oh, okay, I have to give this a try. And those two guys are absolutely hilarious, and they put a lot of work into their podcast. And so I thought, oh, okay, in today's market, you probably, to get any listenership, probably have to spend a lot of time editing and fine-tuning and making it sound really good and being funny. And so it took a long time before I ever got to the idea of making my own. Then No Cat, as it's called, started selling ads on their show. And one of those ads was for another AOLP podcast called Skeleton House, which is run by a guy named Brett that everyone affectionately calls Skelly. And then in the first couple of seasons, his girlfriend Jess and his other roommate Steve played games. They started with Deadly Premonition, and then they did Super Mario RPG, and I don't remember after that. But it was a lot more low-key casual, and so the two people playing would play, and then Brett would interstitial himself in and describe what was going on because he was the eyes of the podcast. I thought, oh, that's pretty neat. So that led me eventually joining the AOLP Discord and seeing, oh, there's even more of these out here, and they aren't all these high, super quality things. Some of them just feel like normal conversations, or what was the things that I liked about Twitch at the time, where it just felt like you're listening to a person just having an experience, and they aren't trying to like fine tune it for an audience. And then somewhere in there, I started listening to Dev Game Club as well. I think also because of Jason Schreier. And that would have been in the early days, because I've been listening to them for a very long time. And they're, similar. They're just two guys talking. I was like, that at some point put the seed in my head that I could do that. I could make something. I could talk about whatever. And then somehow between my first episode in October of 21 and like a month later, I got the joke in my head, what if I did an award show at the end of the year? And the other podcasters were like, oh yeah, that'd be amazing. And so I just wrote up a bunch of like joke awards that were things like not super serious, like, oh, best graphics or best music or whatever. It was like best new character, like, hey, or best emotional moment. It just made you feel something. And like 6 or 8, somewhere in there, different podcasts were like, yeah, I'd send you an audio submission of reading these awards and announcing a winner. Sure, why not? And it grew the second year, and I think this year we'll have even more people being a part of it. And I don't know, it just lets me do things that are creative, even if they're dumb, because, hey, it's my podcast. I can do whatever I want with it.
Just for people out there, Ben is specifically talking about the Dragoonies, or the Dragoonies, depending on how you're pronouncing it, which he does each year. It's like a seasonal. I always feel like it's seasonal now, right? Like when it comes to the end of the year, it's time to get your Dragoonies episode out.
Oh, yes. It's been the last Tuesday of the year, the last 2 years, and will be again this year. I'm in the middle of writing up scripts, and I've got some additional dumb ideas to try out that people have already been like, yes, I would absolutely love to do something stupid like that.
One of the things you mentioned as you went through that was, your first 15 minutes of your first episode. And then specifically, I actually had noted season 2, episode 4, you sort of disclosed that you have SAD, or seasonal affective disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Was that anxiety provoking to sort of let people in on what has been stigmatized in the past?
Can you say that a different way? Because my brain is not clicking with that phrase.
Were you nervous about telling people you had SAD?
Oh, no, I wasn't. I am very open, but I also know that what I suffer from is not as severe as a lot of people and what they go through. Mine is more. It's more. I can't think of the word. It's not as severe. It's not as debilitating. When I first started seeing somebody, they essentially gave me a medication called clonazepam to take if you're just stuck. Because sometimes what would happen in anxiety is I would just be stuck, couldn't move, couldn't think. And my wife is the one who encouraged me to start seeing somebody, because we were having a fight about something stupid. I don't even remember what. I just remember like being unable to move. And she was just like, "Are you okay?" It's like, I can't move and I don't know why. We're not even having like that big of an argument. It was over something minor, you know. And then so that is something that has helped me, but no, I've been I guess open about it because honestly, the more people are open about it, the better. It's kind of like salaries and companies. The more people talk about what they get paid, the more everyone will end up getting paid what they should be. And so the more we can talk about mental health and what we're going through, the less it's stigmatized, because it wasn't that long ago that lobotomies were a thing. And the guy who essentially developed the lobotomy won the Nobel Prize in like 1948. And then in the early 50s, there were medications that, it's not like it's a cure, but it allowed people to function normally. And you just think about all the people that went through lobotomies that were just a couple of years away from a medicine that would have at least helped them act act a little more like how they want to act. I don't like to use the phrase normal, because I've known for a long time the idea of normal is terrible, and who's to decide what that means. It's more, how do you want to actually act? Excuse me. Because a lot of people that I've talked with and talked with my therapist with, and what he's seen and studied and all that, is people know they want to act in a certain way, but then what they have going on makes them act in an opposite way or just completely shut down. And so trying to just get the idea that everyone makes mistakes, and that's not stigmatized like mental health is, when they can be somewhat similar. Like, you can just want to do something, but you just literally can't.
Funny that you mentioned the word normal, right? And I feel like in the past, people think of normal almost as like the mode, right? It's the most common thing. But really, it's a range of behaviors, and it's, am I behaving appropriately for the circumstances?
Mm-hmm.
And right, and if I feel that I'm not, then that's when I have an issue, and it's not to stigmatize the person specifically.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
You did mention your wife, and I wanted to ask you about your support that you get. I think specifically that your dog and your wife make appearances on the podcast, or at least are mentioned on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have other people that help you and support you, or do you want to, mention what they do or how they help?
Sure. So I have a boy. I don't remember what he technically is, but I call him a counselor. Sometimes I call him a therapist. That I see. Initially, I was seeing another person, and their style. I learned some things, but it wasn't really meshing with me and working with me. And then I found this other person that I've been seeing since 2019, like shortly before COVID hit. But I also had learned a lot about myself at that point, but he's helped me learn a lot more. That initially I was seeing like once every other week, and now I think I'm up to like once every 6 weeks or so is when I go. But yeah, there's also my wife and my dog, and that's most of it. I'm fairly introverted, but I'm not. I never remember. I'm either an introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert, and I don't remember which. But I like being around people and like listening to them talk and chiming in once in a while. But I am definitely not the, let's go organize an outing type of person.
I think it's nice that you actually also mentioned like the therapeutic alliance, like the first person you were seeing like helped you, but it didn't click. But that didn't cause you to give up, right? Like you went and found somebody who you did click with, and that's also an important lesson for people.
Yes, I think I hope somewhere I've mentioned that on my podcast. The fact that you had a note about season 2, episode 4, I was like, I don't remember. But yes, it's you don't always get paired with somebody that's going to be good for you long term, or they could be the person that helps you in the beginning or the interim or whatever, but then you realize, okay, now I need to start seeing somebody else.
I guess another thing I wanted to ask about, since we're on the topic of mental health, is this is very core to your podcast. Is there a specific reason why you wanted to forward mental health? Something, related to the game space? Or is it just something that sort of came together naturally?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's kind of a combination of both, where it's something that is kind of on my mind, um, as well as something that I don't know if passionate's the right word, but something that I'm very vested in, and believe that there are so many people that need to get help, which even that phrase is scary to them, because what they really just need is they need to talk to somebody. They need somebody that they can learn how to communicate from in some instances, where they kind of just break down, hey, here's what I'm going through, here's what I'm struggling with. Um, excuse me, and even find ways then to communicate that to other people that are closer to them. People with anxiety may want to tell their spouse about what they're going through, but they're worried about how they might react. So talking to somebody who, hey, you could never see them again because it's a business relationship, can help them figure out, hey, it's okay to talk about these things. This person will be receptive, but also help you be able to communicate like, hey, spouse, I need to talk about myself and what I'm going through. Is now an appropriate time? Versus before I started all this, it would just kind of be word vomit dump, because I was not very good at communicating, and it's not something I really have been good at until I started going to counseling and kind of learning some of these things. I've been just kind of, oh, can't think of the word right now, but not terribly good at being able to communicate those feelings and set those expectations when it comes to personal relationships. Versus I was very good at communications class. Here's what you need to do. Blah 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 blah.
Well, I mean, also, I feel like Nolan might be a little younger than us, but our generation is that male don't share your emotion, right?
Oh yeah.
The first at least 15 years of our lives, that was still the norm before things started changing.
Yeah, that's true too. I think I mean that's part of my background. Is I remember, oh, I don't remember what happened, but I remember like in first grade crying about something and being told not to because you're a man. And I think after that, the next time I cried was when my grandma died when I was 14. Because yeah, there is that whole men shouldn't have emotions and feelings. And it's like, no, what we're really learning when you actually look at it is the men will just stuff everything down, and then they don't learn how to express themselves, how to communicate. And there's all of these stories, and I saw a study, and I can't remember anything about it, but essentially there are so many men that die alone these days because they've driven people away because they don't communicate, or they communicate very harshly. And so, even their children don't want to be around them.
I regret to inform you that even if I am younger than you, we have not yet solved toxic masculinity. But I do think that, podcasts like Dragoon Effect help it move in the right direction for sure.
And I think that's what we can ask for.
Yeah, if someone wants to listen to it, what's a good place to jump onto it?
Oh, that's a great question I haven't thought about. I would say from season 1, episode 1, but be aware that the audio quality is not as good as later seasons. Otherwise, I think I've been told that season 2 is a really good jumping on point. And really, you could just pick whatever game appeals to you. I would say maybe avoid Devil May Cry 3, because I played it because a friend and I were having a discussion. Oh, actually, it was Brett from Skeleton House, who I mentioned earlier, and he loves that game. And I loved the first one. The second one I was okay about, but the ending really got me excited for a third one. And then that third one was a prequel. And at the time when it came out, I was like, this is not very good. But everybody seems to love it, so fine, I'll give it another try. And I still did not care for it. So maybe avoid Devil May Cry 3. If you want something spooky, there is a season, I want to say 7, that's a couple of spooky games. One's called Detention, which is this Korean horror game that's fairly short, that I'm still not sure what happens in it, but it's incredibly interesting. And then the other half, I did another 3 episodes, is about going through an old condemned mental institution, but it's only a horror game in that you get these flashback stories to when it was open and operational and the things that they were doing to people. It's not like Outlast where you have creepy things chasing you around and stalking you. So it's a horror story as opposed to a horror game.
Post-recording, Ryan dropping in here. After the interview was over, Ben actually mentioned that another good starting place is the Legend of Dragoon series. Back to Nolan.
And if I may also throw out a suggestion, I think the Metal Gear Solid games are very fun and translate very well.
Yes, I think so too, because those are almost like audio movies. And
that's true. They're already radio dramas. So
yes, exactly. And I'm in the process of releasing the second one week to week, and the final episode will hit the second to last Tuesday of the year, and then the Dragoonies will be the next week, and then we'll start a new season at the start of 2024.
Can I just say that one of the funniest moments I think I've ever heard on a podcast in general is when you did the gift exchange and you thought you had the gift, but it was something you had personally already ordered yourself and you forgot about it. And then you and your wife were there expecting this gift, and it was just an object that you had already bought.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we did a volunteer sign up. No one was like forced into it, of a Secret Santas for some podcasters. And yeah, we got a box in the mail that didn't look like just a standard Amazon box or something. And I was like, oh, this must be the Secret Santa gift. And I don't even remember what it was, but I do just remember, opening it. And then we looked at it and we're like, oh, wait, this is something we bought.
While we're on the lighter side of things, what happened to Bailey?
Barry. Yes.
Oh, Barry. Sorry, Barry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I don't know. I don't reference him as much. For those that don't know, slight spoiler, Barry is a stuffed bear that my dog has that I thought would be really funny to say was my producer and make jokes about, but they never spoke because I didn't reveal they were a stuffed bear until like the end of my first season, I think. And maybe it was even just with an image on Twitter where they put headphones on it and it was like it was taking notes for me. But I do sometimes. My Game of the Year award is called the Producer Barry Botched Rhinoplasty Game of the Year Memorial Award because my dog bit the nose off of the bear. So we took a picture of that and said it was a botched rhinoplasty. He got too big for his britches and wanted to fix the nose, and it went horribly, horribly wrong.
I mean, one of the fun things, I guess, early was your producer bringing you mail.
Yes.
And the first couple of times, I'm like, this has to be staged, right? Because this is his first podcast. How does he have mail already? and then when it was revealed that it was a stuffed bear, I was like, oh, this makes much more sense.
Yes, yeah, I started. I wanted to encourage people to write in, and still feel free to write in. And then, but I knew obviously in the first episode there wouldn't be any, so I started making up some random things. Or in one of them, I just took junk mail. I think I had, and it was like, congratulations, you're eligible for a credit card or something, and just made that like it was the mail of the week. Not a lot of people have written in, so I dropped kind of the mail segment. But there was some fun to be had with that. And then I ran out of ideas for it.
Maybe sort of to transition more to your podcast itself and then to GGC related stuff to circle back, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there games that you find are better for the audio only Let's Play, or is it just what you enjoy playing more that you that guide your choices?
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's maybe more, I've found games that I don't know how to make work for an audio only Let's Play, and those are shooters and platformers, because I tried to do the Resistance trilogy because I had never played it and I'd heard good things about it and it seemed really interesting. And the story is, but a lot of the times it's me going, oh, there's an alien and I shoot it. Oh, I shoot that guy. And you just hear the machine gun and it's like, this is not interesting listening back to it. And then similar with platformers, it's like, oh, I'm jumping over this hole. Oh, hey, there's another one. Oh, I jumped and I hit the coin box or whatever. The games that work absolutely the best are the ones that tell stories, and I kind of let the games try to let the games tell their story, because that's kind of what I fell in love with the AOLPs, especially with NoCat, is their first season was Final Fantasy 1, which is a game that isn't great, but I love it because I had it way back on Nintendo, and you get the story, but you don't have to go replay a 20, 30 plus hour game yourself. You just kind of get the stuff you really want to re-experience in a nutshell. Some of my favorites that I've done have been things like Alan Wake. He's a writer, and the game is telling this story. In Hellblade, there's this story that is beautiful and blossoming over the course of the game and just kind of adds to it episode by episode. And Doki Doki Literature is a visual novel. Well, that works really well in an audio medium if you're just reading out all of the dialogue, because they have to express basically all of the interactions with dialogue. There's sometimes where you can do it with just static images, but even then it becomes more difficult. But because there aren't a whole lot of static images to describe, you as a me trying to convey this story, I can describe them with more detail because it's one image versus trying to describe a hallway that I'm running down. But yeah, and then Metal Gear Solid, it's a radio drama. That was a really good way to phrase it. So I think those have worked best. Devil May Cry 3 didn't work as well because it's this high action game, and a lot of the fights are just kind of repetitive and not interesting. And I've kind of gotten to the point where I almost edit out most of the combat in these games because it's the least interesting part of trying to tell the story.
Yeah, so you mentioned a little bit what you've taken from other podcasts, and the reason we've been put in contact is from the Dev Game Club Discord server. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your relationship to that podcast. Is there anything that you've taken from them? What anything that they should take from you, maybe? What
I don't know about
what do you think of it? Yeah.
They have a pretty good flow going, I would say. Yeah. So I would have to look up the seasons, but I've been listening to Dev Game Club for a long time. I can't even think what the first season was that I started listening to, but there weren't very many backlogged episodes that I had to go back and re-listen to catch up. And then I would write in because they would talk about things that were interesting, like Resident Evil or Silent Hill, or I think Pokemon. When they did Pokemon Red and Blue, I wrote in basically every week just to talk.
I think
about...
I did too.
Because they were talking about things like, oh, hey, this thing kind of isn't great, or like, people say like every Pokemon game is the same, and a lot of it, when it comes to Pokemon, it's because they changed a little bit every generation in addition to adding more monsters. that when you look back at it, it's like, well, of course, those things were always there from the beginning. But then you try to go back and play an older one, and you're like, oh, this is actually so different. Like, breeding was added in Gen 2, and then in Gen 3 was abilities. And then in Gen 4, they finally decided, oh, instead of all electric moves being special, what if it depended on the move itself? So if you punch somebody, it's physical with an electric attack. And they've just kind of kept adding little things like that that enhance the game every time they make a new one. I think those were most of the ones that I was most heavily involved in. But yeah, I've still been listening. There are some games that don't interest me as much. I didn't have a computer growing up, so when they're playing, what was it, like Eye of the Beholder, it's like, well, this is interesting, but I have no reference point for this game whatsoever. But other people
now they're
do.
playing Alan Wake, so
yeah, and now they're playing
again
Alan
back
Wake.
to you. So they took that from you.
But I've learned a lot listening to them over the years about, where does design come from? What is it like to work in that industry? And not that I've ever had any desire to, but it's really interesting how they look at games, because it's different than I think anything else I watch or read on the internet of how people look at games, whether it's for reviews or let's plays. It's just a completely different motif.
Aside from the obvious Legend of Dragoon, what's a game they should play?
That they should play? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I mean, the Legend of Dragoon would be great, but I don't think that has necessarily influenced many things in the 23 years since it came out. I mean, I don't think that, did they play Mass Effect? I don't think they have. That would be a good one. That's where the other half of my podcast name comes from, is Mass Effect 1. I think that would be interesting. I mean, I suppose they should probably play Minecraft, at least for an episode. Yeah, I don't know. They're good at picking out games, I think, for the most part, but they also worked in a time where they've said it, where a game came out and they played it and they're like, oh my gosh, how are we going to use the ideas of this game to make a game? Or they get it from, people above them saying like, hey, such and such a game came out and it's doing blockbusters. We need to incorporate some of these ideas. So they've got kind of those specific touch points already to just to work from.
Do you have a, as they used to do, a pillar, or what they switched to, a takeaway from their podcast?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the one that probably isn't a revelation, but I think can be, is that games are meant to be fun. I fell into the hole in like 2008 through like 2010 of achievement hunting. And so like I was just, well, and at the time Blockbuster still existed, and it was like 3 blocks away from me, and they had a game rental plan where you could basically check out a game and return a game for a different game as much as you wanted. And so I was just constantly binging through games to get achievement score, and like basically burnt out on games for a little bit. Excuse me. Because I like powered my score up to 100,000, and then I like way hit the brakes. And when the next generation of consoles came out, I intentionally got the PlayStation 4 because I was like, if I start over, I'm not gonna be as, I have to go and get all these trophies and these platinums, as if I'm like, oh man, my score is already this big, I need to keep adding to it. So I intentionally made that switch, which has helped me. And then eventually, I don't know, maybe years later than that, I realized, hey, yes, I have this game, but if I'm not enjoying it, I don't have to finish it. There's no video game police. Even discussions with friends, I can just be like, you know what, I tried it. It was not for me, and that's okay. Not every game is for everybody. There's for a while there, I was in like the extreme key demographic of games as a 20-something white man with a disposable income of, okay, here's this stream. And now we're seeing all this vast array of games, and they're not all for every single person. And some people have offense to that for some reason, and some people really like that. Earlier this year, I played a game called Venba, which is this story of, I apologize because I'm sure I'm misremembering, but from India, it may have been Pakistan, it may have been another country in that area, but they moved to Canada, this man and his wife, in the 80s, and they have a child, and it's dealing with trying to raise your child in a culture that's completely different from yours and what you know, but you feel like you don't belong there, but you want them to both feel like they belong and they're part of your culture, and just kind of all the interactions there. And they do it through kind of cooking these traditional foods from their home country. And they're very simple mini games, but it's just really well done and well told. And so to have a game like that I have literally no touch points for, but I can connect to because it's this interesting story that's not just beefy dude goes shoots bad thing, is incredible to me.
Anything else you want to tell us about your podcast?
I don't know. I tried to do, and it's still up. I did the Mark of Cree on my YouTube, but it's very bad quality because it just is. It did not work out like I thought it might. But that's an interesting game. I like to tell people it's like if Disney made an M-rated video game because it looks like Disney animation, but you're just like hacking people's limbs off and cutting them in two. It's pretty great. Yeah, otherwise it's mostly the podcast, and then I have Twitter, I have Blue Sky, and then my Mastodon is like out of Canada. I don't understand that one, but I just post to that, as well as Threads. But Twitter and Blue Sky are what I use mostly. Twitter especially. I probably use Twitter more than I should.
Your handle on there?
But yeah, it's Dragoon Effect, like on everything. DragoonEffect@gmail.com is my email if you ever want to reach out. That's I think most of it. I was going to leave you guys with a question of what is your goal with this podcast that you're doing?
I wanted to humanize the individuals in the Discord, such that it would be sort of a community building, and at the same time let people promote their hobbies and their work. So like, I appreciate that you put a podcast out that I can listen to and it's fun, and your spin on mental health is really interesting and it's pretty unique in the gaming space. And Nolan has great streams. He's actually one of my favorite watches. He is actually the one that cemented for me, if you don't like a game, don't keep playing. So like before, I was a serial game player and finisher, and it was brutal, and I was struggling through a game, and he brought it up on his channel, and I was just like, I'm struggling so bad. He's like, don't finish it. Yeah. And it was like such a light bulb moment. And I know, like, I never told him this, but it was such a light bulb moment for me that it was great.
Well, thank you. I never knew that. That's really cool to hear. And yeah, I guess for this podcast, I just kind of selfishly, I wanted to know more about, some of the people making cool stuff in the Discord server. And I've been really enjoying, Ben, your podcast. So wanted to get to know a little bit more about it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm always willing to talk, even though I'm introverted and I struggle sometimes to make my schedule work. But this worked out very well. Oh, I just remembered. I've also gotten into Backlogged, which is this website where you can track or review basically like every video game, and a whole bunch of fan games are in there too, that's ever existed, and you can give it ratings and all this. But I'm also Dragoon Effect on there. I have a list of the 34, I think at this point, of my favorite games of all time. That I keep there, so it can always be referenced. I did that for an episode in season 1, and that I have also expanded to add Cyberpunk 2077, and I feel like maybe one more since then, but I can't think of what it was. And so yeah, I've been having fun with that. I think I've written, and some of them are just like, it's fine, it's bad, because they were games I played as a child, because you could rent a video game for the weekend for $1. But I've just been going through and just doing like every game that I've played, as well as, I have some other lists on there, and one of them is the games I've done on the podcast with a link to Spotify for the first episode of each one, so it's really easy to get to. Excuse me. And then I'm also keeping like the games I've played this year that are new this year, the games I've played this year that didn't come out this year, and they're hidden, but when my awards come out, I'll make them public. And it's been, I've played way too many video games in the last 3 years. Last year I finished, it was over 200, and this year I'm up to like 80 some already. And I think I've been using the podcast and the Dragoonies as an excuse to play more. I've definitely used it as an excuse to buy more games, which is probably not the best idea. But I'm just playing things that I want to play in my free time, or want to at least try. And Game Pass is great because I can try like 1,000 different things.
I will say I'm on the opposite spectrum. I think, like, I track the games I play. I'm at like 12 to 15 a year max.
Yeah.
Somewhere in between, usually around 50.
I started tracking. Oh, there's my phone. In 2015, games that I finished, and in like the first year, it was like 12 games, and then it steadily went up a little bit every year because I started keeping track. Oh no, it was 9, and then in 2016 it was 11, and then it just started going up. And in 2021, I hit 94, and I was so mad I didn't get to 100 that the next year I hit 212. But Backlogged is interesting. I just learned about it not long ago. And I would suggest, if you don't know, look it up. It's how it's spelled, except remove the E. So it's like Backlogged.
One thing I do want to get recorded is Nolan plugging all his stuff.
Oh, great. Yeah. If you want to hear more of me, then you can come watch my streams at twitch.tv/CalamityNolan. I do all sorts of fun Nintendo games and do challenge runs, speed runs, critical plays. It's a good time, and I'm always fundraising for different causes, so come by and check it out. I also have a game studio called Up at Night. We've released 4 games on iOS and Android, the most recent of which is a party game played on a Ouija board called Silly Seance. You can check that out. It's pretty fun and cute. Thanks for listening to this episode of Discord Game Club Just Rhetoric. We want to thank Brett and Tim for making the Dev Game Club podcast and for giving us a slot in their release feed. We also want to thank Market and Artemage for starting the Discord Game Club podcast. Go listen to those episodes if you haven't already. If you'd like to hear more interviews like these, let us know. You can find us in the Dev Game Club Discord, where Calamity Nolan and Biostats. Goodbye!
Thanks for that, fellas. So I'm just going to rattle off the things you can do to reach out. We are devgameclub.com, on twitch.tv/Tim Longer Jr. with a JR at the end. Haven't streamed in ages, so don't count it anytime soon. But he is probably going to be back with more Final Fantasy VI next week when this drops. You can also find us on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram at DevGameClub. and shoot us an email at devgameclub@gmail.com. We'll be back with regular episodes next week. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.